Nope, no, they're all too big. Really tiny city. Got fluff on mine. Yes, still working on it, but okay. Right.
That's all I know, it's on your mind.
Yep, it is.
We had two midnight visitors to the playground. A couple teenage girls decided to come hang out for 2 minutes. The other thing I was thinking about was if we do put a fence in, we really do need to leave a gate. Probably by the other gate, the gate. Because people can't even come and knock on the door. If they can't access the building at all, there's a gate.
Yeah.
From the street or whatever.
Well, that's so do we want a gate or just leave it open?
Either way, I think you just need a space.
That may be the one where you can look at the walking type of thing, that Clayton's gonna look at.
Oh, yeah.
So I think having it there, it's about like looking at it, because I know that one. We'll find something, get it figured out.
Morning, everybody. Let's get started. As is with some prayer requests. What do we need to keep in prayer this week? Two?
Mrs. Wright.
Oh,
She had blood clots, and then when she had blood clots, they decided to do a scan, and they found a tumor on her ovary, which was great, because normally ovarian cancer is like super late, you don't find it in maternal, most of the time it's super late, but because of the blood clots, sometimes cancer causes blood clots. And so they were able to identify it, they took it out. Her cancer markers were like super elevated when they initially did all the blood tests. But then when they did the biopsy on the tumor, it's saying it's not cancer so far. So they're still doing a lot of other testing, but they're just waiting to hear back on those biopsy results. But otherwise, everything went really well. She's just recovering. So that's all.
this is Kathy Frazier, our neighbor.
The one that was to
Okay. Well, I had a smile and had a heart rate.
Mhm.
It's going to force her into making some pretty hard decisions. Take care of her mom.
She okay from the wreck?
He's not wanting to go to the doctor.
Dear Lord, thank you for this time that we can come together to study the Word, to study the book of Samuel. Lord, help us to consider your servants Hannah and Eli and Samuel this morning and understand the kinds of people that you're looking to elevate and those that need to be humble. Help us to always seek you and to do your will, bring honor to you. As we're here, we want to keep Ms. Kathy Frazier in our prayers, all her health issues. Pray that you would find some rest and comfort and healing. She would see that you are the great physician. also pray for Lauren's mother and just challenges of getting older and negotiating that independence and all those kinds of things. We pray that she can honor her mother in the best way that she can. That glorifies you. And all those that can't be here or aren't able to be here, Lord, please help us to keep them in mind and reach out to them this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'm just thinking about it now. I don't think I actually sent you the Samuel chart. Did I send you that chart?
Oh.
I sent you some study material, but I don't think I sent you my insane person chart. So I will do that this week. It looks kind of like the conspiracy theorist with the lines, yeah, and all that stuff. So, but it is a great book. It's probably my favorite book in the Bible. And so favorite books in the Bible. So I call it Samuel. I know it's 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's called 1st and 2nd Samuel because at one point we only had technology of the scroll, and a scroll can only be so long, and so they divided this work, which is about 2 lengths of a scroll, into 2 scrolls. And so we have 1st Samuel and 2nd Samuel, but it's meant to be one work, obviously. And now that we've invented the codex, the book, we can put the whole Bible in one place. But that wasn't always the case. So it's good. It's good to have those reminders that the Bible, we still have this witness even through the millennia of change with technology, whether it be the language, which used to be ancient Paleolithic Hebrew, and has turned into something that is much more closer to modern Hebrew. And even as the language has changed, it's remained faithful. And right now I'm going through my Hebrew classes, and one of the things we're doing is we're studying the original manuscripts that we have, and we call them original manuscripts. They're thousands of years old in some cases, but they're not the original manuscripts, right? They're these copies. But it's incredible the fidelity that you see between so we found these copies near the Dead Sea, called the Dead Sea Scrolls. We found almost the entire book of Isaiah and almost 99% of the consonants. So the core of the text, which used to be just consonantal, they wouldn't write the vowels. The core, those consonantals, like 99% the same as the copies that we have from 1,000 years later. And so just to see the care that these faithful men and probably mostly men of God put into caring for the text, transmitting it to the next generation is incredible. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about today. Let's talk about what we're talking about today, which is the book of Samuel. So we're gonna hopefully you got a chance to look at some of the stories that sent out to kind of prepare yourself for our discussion this morning. So we're going to look at in depth right now at Hannah's prayer. I'm calling it Hannah's prayer, poem, song, because it's kind of all those things. And to get us kind of thinking about this, my first question to you all is, what's the purpose of a prayer or a poem in the middle of a narrative? If the narrative is meant to tell us a story, why put something that isn't a story in the middle of a narrative?
A lot of the prayers were sung also, right? They were songs too, correct?
Yeah, I think that's what was.
So
Some of them are meant to be sung as well, but it's hard to tell because, like I said, the consonantal text hasn't changed, but the way that people pronounce things and the way that we use vowels and all those things, sometimes that does change and shift over time. So it's hard to know what the song originally sounded like.
Because it seems like if we have, it's easy to remember or to memorize things when it's put to music and so sometimes I think things are put in here because it helps us remember, and easily memorized and
I just don't want to forget for the next person. So there's certainly an element of compression that goes into song, verse, poetry that happens in English, right? If you want to express an idea in poetry or song, you're going to compress your ideas into the fewest words so it fits into a song. You're going to use a metaphor next to this parallel idea in the last verse, and hopefully, you're crunching all the meaning into a very short, which is why we sing songs, right? Why they're meaningful, why they get stuck in our heads, is because they resonate with us, and they have a lot of meaning packed into. So I think you're right that's why you would use poetry to begin with, verse or whatever you want to call it. But why in a narrative? Why include it in a narrative if you're trying to tell a narrative? Well, maybe I'll give you some multiple choice options to get our. This is priming the pump for you guys. Okay. Is it to further the narrative, right? So is this going to give us more information to help us understand the narrative better? Is it to maybe introduce some themes and ideas that the author wants us to reflect on based on what he's already said or what he's going to say? Or is it just because this is exactly what Hannah said, and so he's reporting it because he's a good journalist, very, very high integrity about making sure that we understand exactly what happened.
We pick A and B.
Take a stand, Laurel Ann.
The answer that I had in my head.
Or is it something else?
No, because I was trying to think. I mean, and I'm having a hard time with narrative because as a librarian, I'm thinking like historical fiction, and the historical fiction means it's a factual piece to add validity to the story. But your A and B made sense. C does not make sense. So there's my stand, not C.
Okay. Does anybody agree or disagree?
Isn't it to reflect the emotions the narrative brings forth in us? The narrative is fact B, fact C, fact D, but the emotions that they engender within us come out in song.
It's an intensification. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at it with B, is it's trying to say these themes, these ideas that are brought up. We're trying to smush them into this poem and repeat them here. Anybody agree with that or disagree? Yeah.
I think I agree to the extent that I understood the question, but I know that the prayer of the publican in the center, if you just tell the story about the publican in the center, it's just a factual, but when you tell them in the context of their prayer, that tells you all you need to know. When you look at Hannah, and the story is compelling, it's a human interest story. When you actually have access to her prayer or communication to God, it tells you everything you need to know about Hannah and her character.
What does it tell you?
Say it again?
What does it tell you?
Well, it tells me that this is not just a news item in today's little local newspaper. This is something that's deeply personal, that she's had a lifelong commitment to. And not only has she prayed about it in the past, but she's committed to it in the future. And it also tells me that she's an individual that has a deep relationship in the cosmos itself. When you actually exit out of the past and you put your hope in the future in the cosmos and in God himself, that takes a person above the street level. That's what it tells me.
So you think this is helping us understand, flesh out the character of Hannah to know who
There's
she
no
is.
doubt at all that this elevates the entire story. The entire story is elevated every time someone like Mordecai tells Esther, this is your godly work. And Esther finds out that her godly work is more than just, serving the king or something. It's something that's done on a national and on a cosmological level. You're moving pieces around in God's plan, the scheme of redemption.
Yeah, and really, what I'm always, I guess maybe not always, what I'd like to point out today is that we don't just live in a world of facts, okay? Because there's a billion facts we could attend to at any given point, right? We could measure the length of this or that, or the thickness, or how many atoms it has, or what it's made of, or right? There's a million billion things that we could interest ourselves in, but it's only meaningful when it's part of our story. That's what makes it matter to us, right? We use the word matter in that way because of this idea. It's connection to our story. It's connection to our purpose. Connection to why we're here, what we're doing, what we ought to be doing. And so when you read the biblical narrative, just understand that the author is presenting things that matter to him, that matter to God, that should matter to you. And it's not just a reporting of this is event B and event C and event D, especially in the narrative, right? Where you could report on a million billion things, right? That's one of John, the evangelist's part. That at the end of his story is like, we could fill up books and books and books with all the stuff that Jesus did. I've presented you the story in this way because I have this purpose of giving you this hope and understanding who this man is and what he came here to do.
I think also the whole point, if you will, in the song stands in contrast to the dysfunctionality that she came out of. She's in a polygamous relationship. Her rival, as it were, has children. She can't have children. Her husband evidently loves her more, but it's no consolation for the lack of children. So the dysfunctionality that she comes out of, we see the kind of character, again, she is.
Let's read the poem real quick, because I want to focus our next question around this poem. Then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one beside you, nor is there any rock like our God. Boast no more so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are shattered, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he set the world upon them. He keeps the feet of his godly ones, but the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king, and will exalt the horn of his anointed. Oh, sorry, that's 1 Samuel chapter 2. Okay, so imagine that you're someone like Hannah, whom the Lord has exalted in this way, right? And you've been suffering, you've been struggling, shame or a low position or whatever it might be for a long time. You've been praying for things to change, and suddenly they do. Should you A, focus on being thankful to God for elevating you and his blessings, his compassion for your situation? Or B, should you be very careful now because you are the one exalted, and so you might in turn now be the object of some humbling? What should you focus on and why?
Like that's
Okay, so in the New Testament, one of my favorite pieces is that, oh no.
Sorry, it's for people online that are watching, so they can. It might be on to hear.
Gender's huge, right? And so, like, in the New Testament, we hear, like, all these women, God, Jesus is tender with them and loving and invites them in, and it's all about inclusion. But in the Old Testament, when we get to hear it, it's exciting for me because we're seeing God even break down that barrier in the Old Testament and use it. And so, I do believe that God is never, if He puts us in a position to where we're going to be used for His purpose, like, our hearts should always be thankful. We shouldn't shy away from an opportunity, in my opinion, shy away from an opportunity to glorify Him. And it is, I think that even in being thankful, you can be very humble. I don't think that they're opposites. I don't, especially coming from a woman in that time, right? You could be extremely thankful. I mean, she's bearing her soul. And I just.
Yeah, and I mean, in the narrative, she says she's pouring out her soul to the Lord, which later becomes a psalm of David, right? In Psalm 42, as the deer pants for water. That's part of a later part is this pouring out of one's soul as some sort of offering, like a drink offering, to the Lord, and this vulnerability in this way, to be thankful for what she has now that her situation has been reversed. So it sounds like so one of the things we're trying to do in this class is I'm trying to present two options, and in some ways there's good evidence on both sides that you should do both, but we're not saying do both. Take a side of which one you think is more important for someone, and take a stand on that and tell us why, and then people will agree or disagree.
It seems like this is talking a lot about how God works with people, and He can't work with proud people. He finds humble people to work with. But we see throughout the scriptures there's a path of he finds humble servants that then become proud and struggle in their service. David or Gideon, or I mean, it seems like every one of them have that path where they're humble, they're picked to serve God, and then so many of them fail because they forget that it's God that's working through them, I think.
Okay, so it sounds like the humility might be key in the way that you're thinking about it.
On Wednesday night, we're studying out of the book of Ecclesiastes, and this last week we were in the verses that we're talking about. If you're gonna ask God for something and make a promise to God, that you better keep it. And I had come up with another biblical story as an example, and had forgotten this one. So her humility to go to God and realize He was the only one that could change her position, and her humility to keep her in a place where, as she moves forward and can deal with this other atrocious wife, is going to be key. But I don't think that's answering your question, because I've lost your question.
It sounds like humility is where you're landing on as well, right?
Okay.
So that's option B. Option A is should you be focused on being thankful that God has elevated you, has brought you some relief or recompense for all the struggles that you've gone through.
And I think the points on humility are good, but I don't think by being thankful, you're thus losing your humility. And so the way you describe B makes it sound like you need
to immediately be humble and fear that the Lord is now going to do something bad to you because he just did something good to you. And so I think to say that the people who were thankful, oh, well, then they lost their way and they weren't humble anymore. Those two things don't go hand in hand. You can be thankful and still that doesn't lead to your demise and lack of humility. So I think focusing on the thankfulness that God has elevated you and is answering your prayer is a good focus. If your other option is humility tied to fear, which is almost what you made it sound like, that you would fear that God is going to do something bad because he did something good for you. I think you miss the good thing God did for you if you're so caught up in the fear of what comes next.
Sure. Yeah, so I think we did a good job walking around this and looking at it from several different angles, right? So hopefully we see that there's this dichotomy within the biblical narrative, right, where somebody is humble, they're chosen for service, they're then elevated, but then, like Bobby said, they don't maintain that humility, and that leads to their downfall. It leads to some sort of corruption or challenge. Good. So one thing I just want to point out that you should check out because it's really cool. Verses 6 through 10 in chapter 2, there's this like almost every line is like a foreshadowing of something that's going to happen later in the book of Samuel. And so you just go through the Lord kills, makes alive, brings down to Sheol and raises up. That happens to Samuel in this book, right? The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low, he exalts. So just thinking about the different characters of Eli, Samuel, Saul, David. Each one of those are brought low, exalted, brought low, exalted. Poor, inheriting the seat of honor. Yeah, so just check those out. Very cool details.
What is a horn? I know
What's that?
it says, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my horn is lifted high." What is that? What is horn?
A horn? It's like a.
Okay, I was thinking horn.
Oh. Well, they would have made them out of a ram's horn.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a musical instrument that you'd use to celebrate. Great. Yeah, it's to rally the troops for battle. It's to sound the victory. It's this thing that draws all the attention to you. Okay, so at the end of chapter 2, the man of God comes and he gives Eli some bad news. Eli's sons have not been acting in the way they ought to, and they're going to die on the same day. That's the sign that God is displeased with them, that they're going to perish on the same day. And based on what we've read in the story so far, we really have three main characters now that Samuel's been born and has been brought to the temple, or the tabernacle rather. We have Eli, Eli's sons, who are basically acting as one character, right? They're the same personality. And then Samuel. Having just read that poem, if we could predict what will happen to these three characters based on the themes that we have at hand now, what's going to happen? If we hadn't read the story yet, what's going to happen to these folks? Yeah. And others? We looked at it. Samuel is going to go from this kind of like, he's not an orphan, but he's given to the tabernacle. He's brought out of his family. He's given to Eli, who doesn't seem like a great father figure based on his other sons. And what they're up to, and how he's not correcting or changing what they're doing. And now Samuel, clearly his sons are old enough. Eli's getting up there in age as well. But Samuel's this little rascal running around the tabernacle, and the little ephod that his mom makes him to help serve and to be brought up as basically as a priest. He's being brought up here. Which is very interesting because if you look at his heritage, he's from Ephraim, but he becomes a priest. He becomes a Levite, basically, which is, again, I think the way that we think about like this lineage isn't quite so clear. It's at least questionable in Scripture. Is that how they thought of it, or maybe they're pointing this out because maybe there was an issue or something like that. But in any case, he's able to serve and do the things that only priests should be doing, descendants from the priestly line. So not just a Levite, but the line of Aaron, right? This line within the line. He's doing those things. So in some ways, he's like been adopted into that family and is now a priest. Notice two details here in chapter 3. So this is Samuel's calling. Eli's eyesight is dim. Who else is dim eyesight in the biblical narrative? Isaac, right? So Isaac told me he has dim eyesight. That's a key detail in the narrative when we read it, right? Because he can't see Jacob and his deception. And he gets tricked into giving Jacob the blessing. Now, does Eli's eyesight have anything to do with the following story? No. But why do we get that detail if it doesn't have anything to do with this narrative?
The eyesight was one of those disabilities that forced Eli to have someone close to him to actually get him from point A to point B and to actually be at his right-hand side. When his sons weren't prepared to do that, Samuel was prepared to do that.
Okay, so you think it is part of the narrative?
Yes.
It's helpful understanding why Samuel's there and what he's up to. Okay. That's a possibility. And he does respond immediately when he thinks that Eli's calling. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think it links story, much like I think it links stories, much like barren women. I mean, what is it with barren women? It seems like we get these stories linked together by these little details, and you don't notice it until you really pay attention, I think. And then you can kind of say, oh, back here it kind of.
Okay. So that's a possibility. And how would you link this story to Isaac? It also happens to Jacob, Isaac's son, when he gives his final blessing to his children. You get that narrative you get that little narrative detail that he's now old and doesn't have sight. So what's this little detail preparing us for the pattern if this is a connection to one of those stories?
Definitely each story marked a change in leadership or what happens within the leadership of a family or the nation.
Yeah, and what was the nature of the change?
Taken away and put forward.
Challenge that assumed inheritance.
Yeah. And how is this story about to do that, if that's what's happening? Yeah. So we see that this little detail about the eyes, we're swapping kids, and now Samuel's the guy. Okay. And it's cool because the narrative author doesn't have to tell us that. But we get this thing, which we see this pattern, we see this connection, we see God, and it's right in line with the poem that we just read as well, right? He's going to take the humble, he's going to exalt them. And if you are the son that's humble and faithful, then God will be swapping you in to varsity very soon, because the guys up there aren't doing what they have to do. Okay, so one other detail. Class is never long. One other detail that you should look at in verse 3, so Samuel 3:3, the lamp of the Lord had not yet gone out. Now, how often do they need to light the lamp of the Lord in the tabernacle?
maybe just once, because they're supposed to keep it going all the time.
Yeah, should have done it like one time 1,000 years ago, or not, but one time hundreds of years ago, and that was it. We lit it. Now it's just going to stay lit forever. Is the instruction that the Lord gives them. But we get this detail. The lamp had not yet gone out. Samuel is sleeping where? He's in the tabernacle, which is a strange place for a boy to sleep. And so I think this little detail is mentioned because Samuel is the only one faithful enough to attend to the lamp, to attend to the duties of the tabernacle, keep everything that ought to be going in that place going, while Eli and his sons are failing in their duties to do these things.
Question,
Yeah.
Thomas. Besides Samuel, he was sleeping with a bunch of other priests. Were they the ones that were just on at that time? Because they rotate?
Yeah, I think the implication is that Samuel's the only one who's doing what all these other people ought to do.
Well, I don't know, I read this yesterday.
Yeah.
In the study portion, it talks about Samuel's not alone, sleeping with the other priests.
Yeah, so in the way that things ought to be functioning, there's a rotation of priests, and they come in and they serve at the tabernacle for a certain amount of time, just like we have a rotation of men that lead things and do things.
They mentioned lottery.
Yeah, and one guy is selected for the big job each year as the high priest, and he gets to go into the Holy of Holies on the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and so there's this whole system. But I think that we get these little tiny details here because it's pointing us to the fact that wait, the light hadn't gone out yet. Like, what do you mean the light hadn't gone out? The light's never supposed to go out. And I think that little detail is meant to point us to the fact that there are priests who should be doing these things, but Samuel's doing them instead. And the state of affairs is such that this child is sleeping in the holy place, seems to be the implication, to attend to these duties because otherwise the lamp is going to go out, right? Otherwise, they're going to completely leave the tabernacle in disarray and neglect.
So is it physical and metaphorical then? That without Samuel being there, not just the physical light is going out, but the light is going out metaphorically?
What do you think?
I guess my question is, when we're reading scripture in the Old Testament, how do we know when it's literal and how do we know when it's metaphorical? Because when you originally brought it up, I was thinking it was just literal, but then in your explanation, it seemed like it was almost, there was more sadness, there was more emotion, more metaphor.
Yeah, and I think this gets into the heart of what is scripture, what is narrative in the Bible, and we can't confuse the fact that the narrative isn't the thing itself. Okay, and I think until this was pointed out to me, it became very obvious to me. But until it was pointed out, I think I had a lot of confusion about this. The narrative is pointing to events; it's describing events that happened in the past, but it isn't the events themselves. And so the narrative has been shaped and presented in such a way to help us understand who we are and who God is and how we ought to act and react and live a life that's pleasing to Him. And it's presented in that way by using some of these details that it's like, was the light at that time on the menorah, on the candlestick, was it about to go out? Yeah, I'm sure it was. But does that also mean that they were this close to neglecting everything? And well, did they lose the ark a chapter later? to the Philistines, right? Right? Like yes, like all of this I think is true. And so the question is like, is it literal or is it a metaphor? It's like I think it's a narrative, and so creative author is going to use those things in ways that are layered in their meanings. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I've come to think about it. And I think it's instead of just saying, well, is this literal or is it a metaphor? I think it can be both, and I think it can be a lot cooler when you start looking at, oh, he put that there because in Leviticus was it 24:2. There's this command to keep the light lit in the tabernacle at all times, and so that ought to catch our attention to bring these things to our mind. David?
We put this in the context of the time, and we know the time is the final chapters, the final tragedies and the butchery out of the book of Judges. So we know that things got progressively worse and worse and worse. And the division of any priestly responsibility being parsed out, all the individual tribes. And now you're down to little, it's not a grand tabernacle as it was once intended. What's left of the tabernacle is probably bedraggled, and the lampstand itself has probably seen better days. And obviously Eli and his boys aren't taking this as seriously as the day it was first consecrated. So everything is running down, and this is in the context of the contemporaries right there. That's the message God wants us to know. This is the lowest point, and the last straw is when Eli and his son's lights themselves physically are put out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the end, and the only light that's left.
Yep. Yeah, and so next week we're going to talk about Samuel's role, what he's doing. So next week, make sure you read chapters 7 through 10. I'll send out some cross references and things to pay attention to while you're reading through that, because we're gonna hopefully think about that in more detail. What it this idea of the judge who is leading, that's going to come to an end with Samuel, and we're going to get a king now. And what the implications there, and why does God provide instructions for the kings in the Torah, but he doesn't want kings, but he says, when you make a king, you make sure that they do this and this and this. And so hopefully we'll get a grasp on understanding some of those things. The last thing I just wanted to mention that we didn't get to is God has instructions for handling the Ark of the Covenant. The people seem to think that the ark is like God's horse that he has to ride around on, and so they're going to bring him into battle with them in order to gain victory over their enemies, and it doesn't work. And so, but God has instructions for handling the ark, but those are in tension with God's priorities for how he wants his people to treat him and to approach him. So the last thing that we don't have time to discuss, but we were going to discuss, was to be, what is more important for God than how his ark, how the tabernacle is handled with regard to his people. And hopefully we see that there's clearly, this ought to be important to us. But if we are thinking that we're bringing God onto our side to go fight in the battle that we want to fight in, without properly attending to what he wants, or considering whose side God is on, then we're going to be left in the lurch, as the Israelites were.